The Montana wind was a restless spirit, carrying the scent of dust and distant rain across the vast expanse of the Blackwood Ranch. Elara felt it on her skin as she knelt in her small vegetable garden, her fingers working the soil with a practiced, gentle touch. This patch of earth was hers, a small kingdom of green defiance against the endless brown and gold of the grazing lands. Here, things grew. Here, there was life. It was a stark contrast to the silence that filled the grand ranch house, a silence her husband, Jedediah, never failed to remind her was her fault. 20 miles away, in the dim, smoke-hazed interior of the Gilded Spur Saloon, that same silence was Jedediah's favorite subject. He slammed his empty whiskey glass on the scarred wooden bar, the sound punctuating the raucous laughter of his companions. "Another round," he boomed, his voice thick with liquor and self-importance. He was a large man, built like the bulls that roamed his land, and he owned the town of Dusty Creek as much as he owned his ranch. "To Jedediah Blackwood," shouted a sycophantic ranch hand named Silas. "The richest man in the territory," Jedediah soaked in the praise, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Richest in land, perhaps," he slurred, leaning back on his stool. "But a king with no prince is just a man waiting for his kingdom to die." He cast a sweeping, theatrical gaze across the faces of the men watching him. "5 years I've been married. 5 years I've given that woman the finest home, the best life. And for what? An empty nursery and a field as barren as winter stone." The men shifted uncomfortably, some laughing, others averting their eyes. It was one thing to complain in private, another to lay your wife's perceived failings bare for public sport. But Jedediah was emboldened by the whiskey and his own bitterness. "My father built this ranch from nothing. Blackwood land, he called it. It needs a Blackwood heir to work it. Not silence." The word barren echoed through the saloon, more potent and damaging than any curse. It would travel on the wind, just like the dust, and find its way back to the ranch. And it did. It arrived with Martha, the general store owner's wife, whose eyes were filled with a pity that stung Elara more than outright malice. Under the guise of delivering a bolt of calico fabric, she recounted the scene at the saloon, her voice a low, hesitant whisper in the quiet of Elara's kitchen. "He was drunk, dear. Men say foolish things." Elara listened without expression, her hands still. She simply nodded, thanked Martha for the fabric, and watched her leave. The pitying glances of the town were nothing new. But the public declaration, the turning of her private sorrow into a public spectacle, was a different kind of wound. It was not a cut, but a cauterization, burning away the last vestiges of hope she had for her marriage. She didn't cry. The tears had dried up long ago. Instead, a cold, hard clarity settled over her. She walked from the kitchen through the silent house, the polished floors and fine furniture feeling alien, like a museum of a life that was never truly hers. She stopped in her bedroom, her eyes falling on the old, iron-strapped cedar chest at the foot of her bed. It had belonged to Jedediah's father, a kind, quiet man who had always treated her with respect. He had entrusted it to her, not his own son, just before he passed. Outside, the sky had turned a bruised purple. The wind picked up, rattling the window panes. A storm was coming. Elara reached for the thin silver chain around her neck, pulling a small, ornate iron key from beneath her collar. Her fingers closed around it, the cool metal a stark contrast to the fire building within her. Jedediah wanted an heir to secure his legacy. He thought her barren. He was about to learn just how fertile the truth could be. The first fat drops of rain struck the dusty porch boards like scattered pebbles, a prelude to the symphony of the storm. Within the hour, the sky over Montana wept, a furious deluge that turned the world outside the ranch house into a churning chaos of wind and water. The wind howled through the eaves, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the hollowness in Elara's heart. It was under the cover of this tempest that the front door slammed open, wrenched from its latch by a gust of wind and the heavy hand of Jedediah Blackwood. He stumbled in, silhouetted for a moment against the violent flashes of lightning, his massive frame dripping with rain. He reeked of cheap whiskey and a deeper, more ingrained resentment. His eyes, bleary and unfocused, found Alara standing by the cold hearth. "Still here, barren thing?" he slurred, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. He didn't wait for an answer, lurching towards his worn leather armchair and collapsing into it. Within minutes, the rhythmic rumble of his snores joined the cacophony of the storm, his drunken oblivion a blessing Alara had long prayed for. She waited, her body rigid, counting the seconds between each ragged breath he took. When she was certain he was truly asleep, she moved with a silent, newfound grace. From a small, unassuming sewing box on the mantelpiece, a place Jedediah would never think to look, she retrieved a small, ornate iron key. Its cold weight in her palm was a solid, tangible promise. The old pine chest sat at the foot of their bed, a silent witness to her years of quiet suffering. Elias Blackwood had given it to her on her wedding day, his eyes filled with a sad, knowing look. "For safekeeping," he'd said, "for when the time is right." The time was now. The key slid into the lock with a whisper of metal on metal. Alara held her breath, turning it slowly. The click of the tumblers falling into place sounded as loud as a gunshot in the tense silence of the room, but Jedediah didn't stir. She lifted the heavy lid. The scent of cedar and old paper rose to meet her, the fragrance of a long-buried truth. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded linen, was a bundle of documents tied with a leather cord. Her fingers, trembling slightly, untied the knot. The top document was a formal-looking paper, filled with the dense, looping script of a lawyer. It was Elias Blackwood's last will and testament. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, catching phrases that made her heart pound against her ribs. "Being of sound mind and body," and "do hereby declare this to be my final will." And then, the words that changed everything. "My entire estate, including the Blackwood Ranch and all associated properties, I bequeath not to my son, Jedediah, but to my true and rightful heir, my son, Samuel Miller, currently residing in the town of Willow Creek." Beneath the will was a sealed letter, her name written across the front in Elia's familiar hand. She broke the wax seal. "My dearest Alara," it began, "if you are reading this, then my son has become the man I always feared he would. For that, I am deeply sorry. I have burdened you with this secret, but I saw in you a strength and integrity that Jedediah has never possessed. Samuel is the son of a woman I loved long before my marriage was arranged. His mother passed when he was a boy, and he lives now with her sister in Willow Creek, unaware of his heritage. I could not claim him in life without causing a scandal that would have destroyed them both, a failure I regret to my dying day. Jedediah knows only of the ranch's supposed debt, a lie I created to ensure he could not sell the land. The true deed is with this will. I trust you, Alara. See that what is right is done. Give my son the life I never could." A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek, but it was not a tear of sorrow. It was one of vindication, of purpose. All the years of humiliation, of feeling worthless, were washed away by the weight of this sacred duty. She moved with swift efficiency. The documents were wrapped in a piece of oilskin and tucked into a small leather satchel. She added a loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, and the small pouch of coins she had painstakingly saved from household money. She cast one last look at Jedediah, a pathetic, snoring heap in the chair, a king oblivious that his kingdom was built on sand. Then, without a sound, she slipped out the back door and into the raging storm, the fierce wind and rain a baptism, washing away the old Alara and forging a new one in the heart of the tempest. The storm had broken by the time dawn threatened the eastern horizon, leaving the world washed clean and utterly ravaged. Alara rode through a landscape of ruin. The wind, now a mournful sigh, whipped through the pines, shaking loose droplets of water that felt as cold as ice against her skin. Her mare, Bess, a sturdy, calm-eyed animal she'd deliberately chosen for her endurance, picked her way carefully through the treacherous terrain. The familiar path to the town of Willow Creek was gone, replaced by a treacherous slick of mud and debris. Uprooted saplings lay like fallen soldiers, and the creek she needed to cross had swollen into a churning, brown torrent. Ilera paused at the water's edge, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The current was strong, pulling at the banks with a hungry roar. For a terrifying moment, doubt washed over her, cold and paralyzing. This was madness. Jedediah would wake, find her gone, and the full force of his fury would be unleashed upon this land. He would find her. The thought sent a tremor through her hands, but then she clutched the oilskin pouch tucked safely inside her coat. Inside lay the will. Inside lay justice. The memory of Jedediah's sneering face in the saloon, the echo of the word, Baron, that had been used like a whip against her for years, flooded back, extinguishing her fear with a hot surge of resolve. She was no longer just a barren wife. She was a keeper of a promise. She urged Bess forward into the churning water. The mare fought the current, her powerful legs straining, and Ilera held on, her knuckles white, her focus absolute. They emerged on the other side, soaked and shivering but victorious. The rest of the journey was a grueling test of will. The cold seeped into her bones, and a gnawing hunger made her stomach ache. She had only packed a small pouch of dried meat and a single apple, knowing that speed was more important than comfort. By late afternoon, exhausted and mud-splattered, she saw the first humble buildings of Willow Creek. It was smaller than her hometown, little more than a single muddy street lined with a handful of wooden structures. A general store, a blacksmith's forge with a plume of smoke rising from its chimney, a saloon, and a few scattered houses. As she rode down the main thoroughfare, she felt the weight of curious eyes. A woman traveling alone was a rarity, an invitation for speculation and gossip. She kept her head down, her wide-brimmed hat pulled low to shadow her face, and focused on finding a place to rest, a place where she could be invisible. She found a modest boarding house at the far end of town, run by a stout, gray-haired woman named Mrs. Gable, whose gaze was sharp but not unkind. "Just passing through," Ilera murmured, offering a story about visiting a sick cousin in the next county. She paid for a room for 2 nights, the clink of the coins on the wooden counter sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet reception area. Her room was small and sparse, but it had a bed, a basin, and a lock on the door. It felt like a fortress. After washing the grime from her face and hands, she sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the documents spread before her. Elia's letter had mentioned Samuel Miller's aunt, a woman named Martha, who had raised him after his mother passed. He hadn't provided a surname for Martha. How was she to find a woman named Martha in a town of strangers? Asking directly was too risky. The name Blackwood carried weight even this far out. She had to be clever. She had to listen. Tucking the papers away, she decided her first step was to learn the rhythms of this town. She would go to the general store, the heart of any small community, and simply listen. The morning sun, weak and watery after the storm, did little to warm the damp air as Ilera stepped onto the muddy main street of Willow Creek. The general store stood directly across from the boarding house, its wide porch and large glass windows a beacon of civilization. Tucking a loose strand of hair back into her bun and smoothing the front of her simple dress, she took a steadying breath. Her entire future hinged on what she might learn inside. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered, announcing her arrival to the 2 people within. A balding, portly man behind the counter polishing a pair of spectacles, and a woman in a gingham apron inspecting a bolt of calico fabric. The air was thick with the scent of roasted coffee beans, cured leather, and dried lavender. It was a comforting, domestic smell, so alien to the masculine sense of sweat, horses, and whiskey that had defined her world for so long. Ilera gave a polite nod to the storekeeper, who returned it with a curious but friendly smile. "Mornin', ma'am. Nasty bit of weather we had. Can I help you find something?" "Good morning," she replied, her voice quieter than she intended. "Just a few necessities. I'll look around if I may." "Take your time," he said, returning to his spectacles. She moved slowly through the aisles, feigning interest in tins of peaches and sacks of flour. Her hands were steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. She was an actress on a stage, and a single misstep could bring the curtain down. She ran her fingers over a spool of thread, her ears straining to catch any snippet of conversation. The woman in the apron was complaining about her chicken coop, the roof damaged by a fallen branch. The storekeeper offered sympathies and the name of a good handyman. Alara's hopes began to wane. This was everyday talk, the mundane rhythm of a town where she was a stranger. She picked up a bar of lye soap and a small bag of sugar, items a traveler might need, and walked toward the counter just as the bell chimed again. A young man, no older than 16, hurried in, his face flushed. "Mr. Gable, is the delivery from Bozeman in yet?" the boy asked, out of breath. "Aunt Martha's been frettin' all morning about her medicine." Alara froze, her hand hovering over her coin purse. "Martha," Mr. Gable shook his head. "Stage is delayed, son. The ford at Miller's Creek is still too high. I told Samuel the same thing not an hour ago when he came by for those nails. He said he'd check back this afternoon after he finishes mending the fence line at the old Peterson place." The boy's shoulders slumped. "All right, I'll let her know. You tell Martha that if it ain't here by sundown, I'll send word, mister." Gable added kindly. "And tell Samuel not to work himself into the ground. That man takes on more than any 3 folks I know." Alara's mind raced, piecing it together. Samuel Miller, Aunt Martha, he was here. He was a real person, a man known for his hard work, a man who cared for his aunt. The information was a jolt of electricity, sharp and clarifying. The old Peterson place. It was a tangible location, a destination. She placed her items on the counter, her movements deliberate and calm, betraying none of the turmoil within. "Just these, thank you." Mr. Gable tallied the cost. "New in town?" he asked, his curiosity finally getting the better of him. "Just visiting," Alara said smoothly, the lie coming easier now. "My cousin, she lives just outside of town." He nodded, satisfied with the simple explanation. She paid him, took her small cloth bag, and turned to leave. As her hand touched the door, she paused and looked back at the storekeeper. "Pardon me," she began, her tone casual. "I'm a bit turned around. Which way is the old Peterson place?" Mr. Gable pointed out the window to the north. "Follow this road about 2 miles out. Can't miss it. Sits on a rise to the west, but there ain't no one livin' there now." "Thank you," she said, offering a small smile. "I was just curious." She stepped back out into the pale sunlight, the bell chiming her departure. The air felt different now, charged with possibility. She had a name, and now she had a direction. The small bell above the general store's door chimed softly as Alara stepped back out into the cool, damp air of Willow Creek. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, scrubbed clean by the storm, but the earth below was still saturated. Mud clung to the boardwalks and turned the main street into a thick, brown ribbon. Following Mr. Gable's directions, Alara walked toward the edge of town, her sturdy boots making soft, sucking sounds with each step. The worn satchel containing her few belongings felt heavier now, weighted with the gravity of her purpose. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched her quickening pace. The cluster of wooden buildings thinned out, replaced by modest homesteads with wisps of smoke curling from their chimneys. Soon, those too fell away, and she was alone on a road flanked by open country. The rolling plains of Montana stretched out before her, vast and indifferent. It was on a landscape just like this that she had felt trapped, but today it felt like freedom. With every step, a litany of fears echoed in her mind. What would she say to him? "Hello, my husband is a cruel man, but his father left you his ranch." It sounded like madness. What if Samuel Miller was just like Jedediah, greedy, dismissive, and cruel? Elia's letter had spoken of a good man, but Elia's had been dead for years. People changed. The weight of that possibility settled in her stomach, cold and hard. She had to see him first. She had to judge the man for herself before she laid her life, and his, bare. The old Peterson place came into view after a mile or so. It was a picture of neglect, a testament to hardship or heartbreak. The farmhouse sagged slightly, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the fields. A barn stood nearby, its wood weathered to a silvery gray. And stretching out from the property was a long line of fencing, sections of it collapsed and broken. It was there, near a particularly damaged stretch, that she saw him. Elara slowed, her breath catching in her throat. She veered off the road, her movements silent and cautious, and found cover behind a thicket of wild plum bushes that bordered the property. From her hiding place, she had a clear view. He was a man built for labor, with broad shoulders and strong arms that moved with an easy, practiced rhythm. He was mending the fence, just as the storekeeper had said. He worked with a quiet diligence that was utterly foreign to her. Jedediah had overseen work, he had never performed it. Jedediah gave orders, his hands soft and uncalloused. This man's hands were capable and sure. She watched him for what felt like an eternity. He would set a new post, tamping the earth around its base with powerful, economic movements. He stretched the wire taut, his body a study in leverage and control. There was no wasted motion, no frustrated sigh or angry kick at a stubborn rock. There was only the task and the man's steady focus on completing it. At one point, he paused, pulling a canteen from his belt and taking a long drink. He wiped the sweat from his brow with his forearm and gazed out over the neglected land, not with the arrogance of an owner, but with the thoughtful consideration of a steward. In that simple, unguarded moment, Elara saw the man Elias Blackwood must have seen. He was nothing like Jedediah. The fear that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a fragile, tentative hope. Her mission no longer felt like a desperate gamble, but a righteous correction. This was the man who deserved the Blackwood legacy. This was justice. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Elara smoothed the front of her worn dress. She could feel the stiff edges of the will and the letter tucked securely in her bodice, a solid reminder of her truth. The time for hiding was over. With a resolve that felt brand new, she stepped out from behind the plum bushes. The crunch of her boots on the gravelly dirt sounded impossibly loud in the afternoon stillness. Samuel Miller stopped his work instantly, his head snapping up. He turned, his expression shifting from focused labor to wary curiosity as he saw her. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the broken fence. A stranger who held his past, and a man completely unaware that his entire future was about to change. The sound of a snapping twig cut through the quiet rhythm of his work. Samuel Miller straightened up instantly, his hand resting on the handle of his fencing hammer. His movements were fluid, economical, born of a life spent in physical labor. He turned, his eyes narrowing against the afternoon sun, and saw her. A woman standing at the edge of the overgrown pasture. She was dressed in traveling clothes, now stained with mud and wear, but the quality of the fabric was still apparent. She didn't belong here, among the decaying fences and wild thistle of the old Peterson place. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he called out, his voice steady but laced with caution. Strangers this far off the main road usually meant trouble or they were lost. She took a hesitant step forward, her hands clasped in front of her. He could see the exhaustion etched on her face, the faint tremor in her hands, but her eyes held a fierce, unwavering resolve. "Are you Samuel Miller?" "I am," he confirmed, not lowering the hammer. "Who's askin'? My name is Elara Blackwood." The name hung in the air between them. Blackwood. Even out here, that name carried weight. It meant land, power, and money. The kind of things a man like Samuel Miller had nothing to do with. His suspicion deepened. He'd heard of Jedediah Blackwood, of course, a hard man with a harder reputation. "I don't know any Blackwoods," he said flatly, his tone a clear warning. "I know," Elara said, her voice surprisingly soft. "But your father did, Elias Blackwood." Samuel let out a short, humorless laugh. He finally set the hammer down on the fence post, crossing his arms over his chest. "Ma'am, I think you've got the wrong man. My father was John Miller, a logger. Died in a felling accident before I was 10. I never knew anyone by the name of Elias Blackwood." Elara's gaze didn't waver. She saw the wall he was putting up, the immediate, instinctual rejection of a story that sounded too fantastic to be true. She had expected this. "He wasn't your father by name," she clarified, taking another slow step closer. "But he was your father by blood." His jaw tightened. That's a serious accusation to make against a dead man and my mother. It's not an accusation. It's the truth, she insisted, her voice gaining strength. A truth he wanted you to know. She saw the disbelief hardening into anger in his eyes, and knew words alone wouldn't be enough. She reached into the worn leather satchel at her side, her fingers closing around the oilskin packet. With deliberate movements, she unwrapped it, revealing the papers within. She held out the folded letter first. He wrote this for you. Just before he passed, Samuel stared at the offered letter, his calloused, dirt-stained hands hanging uselessly at his sides. He looked from her earnest, desperate face to the yellowed parchment. Something in her unwavering conviction made him hesitate. With a sigh of weary reluctance, he wiped his hands on his denim trousers and took the letter. The silence was broken only by the rustle of the paper as he unfolded it. His brow furrowed in concentration as he read. Elara watched every flicker of emotion on his face. The initial skepticism giving way to confusion, his eyes scanning the lines of elegant, faded script. He traced the signature at the bottom, Elias Blackwood, with his thumb, then read the whole thing again, slower this time. The words on that page were rewriting his entire life, erasing the simple, hard-scrabble story he'd always known. When he finally looked up, the defensiveness was gone, replaced by a profound, shell-shocked bewilderment. "How?" he started, his voice a hoarse whisper. "How is this possible?" "There's more," Elara said gently. She held out the second document, the one with the official seals. "This is his true last will and testament. It invalidates the one his son, Jedediah, used to claim the ranch." He took the will, his hands trembling slightly now. He scanned the legal jargon, his eyes catching on the key phrases that leaped out like flames. "To my firstborn and only true son, Samuel Miller, the sole and rightful heir to the entirety of the Blackwood Ranch and all its assets." He stumbled back and sat down hard on a weathered log, the papers clutched in his fist. The fence, the fields, the vast Montana sky, it all seemed to spin around him. It was a lie. It had to be a trick. He looked up at Elara, his eyes searching for the angle, the deceit. Why bring this to me? What do you want from all this?" Elara met his gaze without flinching, her own pain finally surfacing. "Jedediah Blackwood is my husband," she said, the words tasting like ash. Elias knew his son's character. He is a cruel, bitter man who believes the ranch is his birthright. Elias entrusted these papers to me, hoping I would have the courage to find you and see his final wish fulfilled. She paused, taking a ragged breath. "What I want is justice, for Elias, for you, and for me. I want to be free of him." Her raw honesty struck him harder than the legal documents. This wasn't a scheme for money, it was a desperate plea for liberation. Samuel looked down at the will in his hand, then out at the endless horizon. The simple life of mending fences was over. The weight of a legacy he never knew he had, a legacy of wealth, power, and immense danger, had just been laid at his feet. The weight of the documents in Samuel's hands seemed to settle into his very bones, anchoring him to a reality he'd never known. He looked from his father's elegant script to Elara's tired but determined face, and the last of his skepticism washed away. This wasn't a trick, it was a reckoning. He finally nodded, a slow, deliberate motion that sealed their pact. "Jedediah sounds like a man who has taken more than his share," Samuel said, his voice steady and clear. "For my father, and for the life my mother was denied, I'll stand with you, Elara. We'll see this through." The journey back to the Blackwood Ranch was thick with a tension that mirrored the gray, brooding Montana sky. They rode in a borrowed buckboard, the legal documents wrapped in oilcloth and tucked safely away. The silence between them wasn't awkward, but filled with unspoken thoughts. They were two strangers, bound by the will of a dead man and the cruelty of a living one. "Elias, your father, he was a fair man," Elara said, breaking the quiet as they crested a ridge overlooking the sprawling valley. "He saw the bitterness in Jedediah long before it took root. I think that's why he did this. He was protecting his legacy." "I wish I could have known him," Samuel replied, his eyes tracing the distant borders of the land that was now his. All I have is a name and this kingdom he left me. You have his character, Alara countered softly. He trusted that, he trusted you. When the familiar silhouette of the Blackwood Ranch house appeared, a cold knot formed in Alara's stomach, but it was different now. Fear was replaced by resolve. This was no longer her prison. It was the stage for her liberation. Jedediah was on the porch, a bottle of whiskey in his hand, his face a mask of thunderous rage. He'd clearly just woken, his fury from her absence festering. He saw the buckboard approach and his eyes narrowed, first locking onto Alara, then widening in confusion at the man beside her. "You!" he roared, stumbling to his feet as they pulled to a stop. "Where in the hell have you been? And who is this farmer you've dragged home?" Alara dismounted, her movements calm and poised. She did not flinch under his glare. "Jedediah, this is Samuel Miller. He's here on business concerning your father." Samuel stepped forward, his solid frame a stark contrast to Jedediah's drunken swagger. He held out the copy of the will. "According to Elias Blackwood, this ranch is no longer yours." Jedediah snatched the paper, his eyes scanning the words with disbelief that quickly curdled into pure fury. He crumpled it in his fist. "A forgery? You think you can walk onto my land with this piece of trash, and take what's mine? I am the Blackwood heir. The only trash here is the lie you've been living," Alara said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "The original will is filed with Lawyer Thompson in town. Sheriff Brody has been made aware of the situation as well. Your father disinherited you, Jedediah. He left his legacy to a son he knew would honor it." The mention of the law, of official, unassailable authority, sapped the fight from Jedediah's posture. His power had always been in fear and isolation, in being the absolute ruler of his domain. But he was cornered, exposed. He looked from Alara's unyielding face to Samuel's quiet strength and saw his world collapsing. He sputtered, a string of curses and empty threats, but they were hollow. Defeated, he shoved past them into the house, emerging moments later with a saddlebag and his rifle. He didn't look at them as he stomped toward the stables, a bitter, diminished man swallowed by the vastness of the land he had just lost. As the sound of his horse faded into the distance, a profound quiet settled over the ranch. The setting sun bathed the porch in a warm, golden light. Alara took a deep breath, the first truly free breath she'd taken in years. "It's done," she whispered. Samuel stood beside her, looking out at the endless grasslands. "It's bigger than I ever imagined." "It is," she agreed, "and it's yours now. A chance for a new beginning." He turned to her, his expression earnest. "It's ours to make better. This is your home too, Alara, for as long as you want it." A small, genuine smile touched her lips. She had sought justice and found not only freedom, but also a partner. Together, under the wide Montana sky, they would build a future on the very ground where her suffering had ended.